Alright, so we have seen how to create something like this with the 3D designer in the prior part. Now in this part we'd like to see perhaps how to animate these. How can we make sure that these blocks go up and down over time in an animation, something like for instance this one does, and where you can see how these blocks are smoothly going up and down. Let's find out. Basically what we need to do is to have the brightness of these elements change so that that brightness maps into an elevation which is changing over time. You can certainly draw something yourself manually, but perhaps as a quick introduction on how to get started quickly, let's use some of those animated filters that PD Howler offers. To begin with, I'm going to the file menu and create a new animation, actually a new image document, and I'll make it fairly small here just for quick demonstration. And let's take the 360p, 640 by 360, and I'll turn this into an animation with a placeholder of, let's say, we need 5 seconds. Right, so that will come at 24 frames per second to 120 frames. And you know what, we don't need that many initially, so let's do it, make it really simple, just 30 frames. Alright, so we have an animation of 30 frames. And what I'm going to do now is go to the animation timeline editor, that's this one down here. And with that, let me arrange this a little bit so I can see the whole, most of it anyway. With that, I'm going to some of the animated filters towards the bottom of this menu. Resize this, and you see some animated filters. There's one in particular, the Perlin noise, right, or the color Perlin noise. And these will change over time as you're going through time along the timeline here. And so, for instance, let's take the Perlin noise and increase the size, the scale here. Look for different types until we find one that we like. And let's try this one, why not? And the speed at which it's moving. Now at this point here it's kind of difficult to predict, to just preview how fast it's going to move. So we'll just have to render one and try it. We probably don't need the undo here. Let's uncheck this and just render that. So it's rendering this animated Perlin noise. You can see the preview here moving and changing ever so slowly. And as it's rendering that, it will populate the image sequence into the animation of about 30 frames. And so it's done at this point. We can go and play the animation, and you can see that it's basically doing a change of the brightness. If you look at every pixel here, let's see if we can move this over a little bit. Let's go and zoom in here. If you zoom in and you focus on a particular pixel, you can tell that, well, because things are changing in this Merlin noise, you'll see that basically a particular pixel is not staying at the current color. Like for instance, look where my cursor is, it goes from bright to dark to bright again. And that basically, if we translate that into an elevation map, it will basically cause an elevation to change. The brighter it is, the higher up it goes. The darker it is, the more down into the bottom area it vanishes. So let's simply go to the filter menu right here, transform, and 3D designer. Oh, and actually no, let me cancel out of that quick and zoom back out to show 100%. There you go, so we can see the full terrain, as it will take this and interpret it as a elevation map. So let's go back to filter, transform now, and 3D designer. We don't need this one anymore, and we can move this over here. Alright, so at this point we have the wireframe mode. Let's go to perspective and let's go to shaded mode, and you see it basically looks at the Perlin noise pattern or brightness distribution as something like a 3D terrain, an elevation map. And you can look at it, you can rotate this around and look at it. And because it is changing over time, because we have this on one frame, but we are actually going to have this rendered along the entire animation sequence, it will cause this elevation map to change over time. So let's first just look at it from a particular angle, perhaps change the lighting. You can actually change the color here, you can make it a particular color of interest, Or you could also say, instead of using that object color, you can use the color that is in the image itself. So you can now actually see when it's dark, it goes down lower, and when it's bright, like in this area, it's going to go higher. Other things you can use is a color that's actually in the swap buffer, and we'll get to that a little later. Right now the swap buffer is simply plain white, so it's not going to show anything drastically different. But certainly if you use the one from the image, you see that there are some darker areas, the lower zones in the valleys, and the peaks are bright. Now you can still change the detail level here as well. Right. So this one is a sample step. The amplitude that multiplies to the elevation map so that you can have it stick out much further into elevation. Or you can now also change the angle at which this is viewed, the pitch angle and the bank angle. And once you've chosen your angles here, let's go and animate, which means basically what we'll do is we'll click on animate here. And we could, in addition to what's going on frame by frame as it's animating through the animation sequence, we could on top of that also cause the angles to rotate. We can have the pitch or the heading and the bank angles increase. But in this case, I'll just keep them as they are, so we can really focus on how the elevation itself is behaving over time. So let's go and click OK, and watch here what's happening. It's now rendering along the timeline. Every single frame is going through that 3D designer transformation, and now we do have that animation turned into a 3D animation or 3D terrain. And as we play it, there you can see now how this is basically causing a 3D terrain that's animated, because wherever the brightness changes, it causes the elevation to change on the 3D side.